Welcome to the Gospel Truth Show produced by Cross and Crown Radio. We want to make a lasting difference in your life and in our community. Our mission is to produce biblical, entertaining, and Christ-centered programs for God's people and folks all around the world. Post a comment or question and sit back and enjoy the show. gospeltruthshow.podbeam.com.
Good evening, this is Cross and Crown Radio, and I'm your host, Mike Robinson. This is also the Gospel Truth Podcast. We're so glad that you're with us tonight. We got an incredible show today, lots of topics. I have a list I'm going to have to read from. We got so many topics tonight. Franklin Graham in the UK. Hello, John. It's good to have you. Hope all is going well there. Are you off for the summer? Anyways, Franklin Graham's bus ads have been rejected in the UK because of the idea that the transgender issues, homosexual issues, that he would be a hate speech person. So they've rejected that. Also, we're going to talk about possible problems with the United States Supreme Court nominee. See if there's possible problems. We don't know that for sure because on paper he looks really good in so many ways. Also, we're going to talk about the removal of the cross that has been up since World War I, and that's a big problem. Hello, Eric. It's good to have you. As well as the thousands and thousands of Christians. This is a big story. The liberal media rarely covers this. Thousands and thousands of Nigerian Christians have been killed in the recent weeks, and tens of thousands in the last few years, just because they're Christians. Of course, there's political reasons behind it also, as well as financial reasons. But the issue they use as an excuse, of course, is that they are Christians. We're also going to be talking about some fascinating archaeological finds in Israel recently. And then also we're going to talk about a list of some proofs for the existence of God. So we got quite a bit on the slate here today. But this is Cross and Crown Radio. We're so glad that you're with us. Hello, Mike. It's good to have you. If you have a chance, our biggest audience is on YouTube. This is Facebook Live right now. But we take these and we put these on YouTube where we have thousands and thousands of viewers. So we appreciate if you could go there and subscribe. It's Cross and Crown Radio. We appreciate that if you can. But Franklin Graham's bus ads were removed because of a massive uproar against them. Could you imagine that? This former Christian nation, I say former, England, the UK, they have now banned Franklin Graham's ads to protect people that call themselves transgender as well as homosexual. So it's not just that we want them to have rights, they say, the advocates say, but now anybody who may have a worldview that collides with them, they're not allowed to advertise. So free speech is out the window, and so they're doing this to Franklin Graham's ministry. Now, I really like Franklin Graham for many reasons. I obviously don't agree with everything he says or everything he does, just like none of you would agree with everything that I say or everything I do. Only Scripture is, of course, 100% accurate and inerrant. We know that for sure, that we need a source, and that would be God, who reveals absolute truth to us in His Word. And so that's our foundation, that's our guide, that's our standard. We measure everything else against that. But Franklin Graham has massive pressure against his ministry going there in the UK from the LGBT groups. I don't know the other letters that come after that now because it keeps expanding. So I think most people now abbreviate LGBT plus groups. Hello, Martin. It's good to have you. So it just goes on and on and on. Pretty soon, everybody but I guess basically a white male Christian, will be part of that group, right? So at some point it loses all of its meaning if you just keep adding more and more people. Of course, part of that is having a political agenda or an ideology to divide. That's part of the reasons for these things occurring. In other words, the United States of America, certain groups are trying to make us disunited. But we should be united under the Constitution, no matter what religion you have or worldview you have. We should be able to do that as American citizens. But these people aren't doing that in the UK. We see these elements also, obviously, in the United States. But the UK is where Franklin Graham's having problems even putting ads on his buses. They actually put the buses in the parking lot and weren't using them. Hello, Jeremiah. Instead of picking up the citizens and making money and making people's lives easier by using the buses, but they put the buses on hold until they can get all the ads off. That's how fanatical these folks are. And what's interesting about this is going on in the UK. let's see what's the name of the town. He's going to be doing a Lancashire Festival of Hope, which is supposed to not take place until the early fall in September. In a town called Blackpool is where some of these bus ads are supposed to be running. And this particular town is one of the worst towns in Britain with crime and with health issues and so forth. It says most of the citizens die much younger than anywhere else in England, that it's known as it's with many grimy, I quote, drag clubs, huge substance abuse, and loan shark payday lenders who rip off the poor to make more and more money off of their backs. And the government leaders turn a blind eye to all that usury. So they let these poor citizens get ripped off by all these particular payday lenders that charge huge rates to give these folks some money. And yet they're saying Franklin Graham cannot come in here. He cannot advertise here. It says by The Guardian, more than half of the local population smokes, the highest rate in the country. 1 in 3 pregnant women, even up to the point that they go in the hospital to give birth, are still smoking. So they're dragging on a cigarette a lot of these poor citizens there in this town, even as just before they're giving birth. They say many people have problems with alcohol, while deaths from drug abuse rival those in the worst estates in London and elsewhere. So this town really needs the gospel, really needs the truth of the biblical text, really needs more and more of the imprint of the Christian worldview upon it, and yet they're rejecting it and saying, no, that's hate speech, we cannot have this, you can't even advertise your festival. Wow, what is the world coming to? I don't think everything's getting worse, but there are some things that are getting worse. I know some of us, especially those who might have a pre-mill eschatology, we think that you might think that all things are getting worse. They're not, but there are some really important things that are getting worse, that seem to be getting worse every single day. And it gets into the realm of nonsense and lunacy, how far some of these situations go. Just imagine if Trump wasn't elected. Again, I was not a Trump supporter, so don't think I was supporting Trump all the time. I wasn't. I wanted to see Cruz win. Then when Cruz didn't win, I had to go with Trump, because Trump obviously is a lot better than Clinton. And we can see that already with the Supreme Court justices that he nominated that got through, and one that recently got nominated. Clinton obviously would have nominated leftists, which would have made our life even more difficult. So I'm really glad that Trump's in there over Clinton, and yet we see if he didn't get in, you can imagine how bad things could get. So what do? We as individuals, as churches, as a community of Christians in a town, we are to go forward with just the basic simplicity of what Scripture tells us to do. We don't just sit back and stay on our smartphones all day, but we go out to love others. We tell others about Jesus, about his death and his resurrection. We feed people, we take care of people, and we get involved. And so this is what we do. We don't hold back just because of all these leftists going crazy and going wild. And so we have to support people like Franklin Graham in these type of crusades. I'm not a big crusade guy. I don't think that's the best form of evangelism. I think discipleship and mentoring and talking to people about Christ as individuals as well as churches is probably one of the best ways to do it. But Graham is trying to do what he thinks is best. And yet, because he upholds, just because of this, because he upholds the traditional view of the marriage relationship, they've rejected his ads on these buses. They've stranded the buses just so these ads can't even be seen, even though the poor people now have no way to get to work in some of the areas. They don't care. Their agenda is that important to them. Their ideology is that important to them. It's really sad. So what do? Do we just take off our shoes and throw it at the TV screen when we see these things on the evening news? No. We can do some really simple but powerful things. And I know in my life, and those folks that I'm blessed to be able to lead and shepherd in a local church here as pastor, I know often we don't do the simple things we should do, like pray for the people involved. Even the leftists, even the folks that are going wild and crazy with these loony ideas and these immoral ideas. We need to pray for them Not just get mad at them. Of course, when we see darkness and evil, advancing, we get angry, we get mad. But let that anger turn into a passion to pray for these folks. I don't do it enough. I admit that. I do it sometimes, and I want to do it more and more. And I would encourage you also to do that. And share your faith with those people at work that you say, oh, they'll never believe. They can't. Pray for them. Pray for them. Pray for them consistently and gently. Share the faith with them if you have time and availability. So they said, this is what Graham said about this, Franklin Graham. He said, I'm not coming to preach hate. I'm here to preach about a Savior, Jesus Christ, who can make a difference in our lives if we put our faith and trust in Him. That's not allowed. That's not allowed in the UK. That's amazing. It's like, did we wake up and this is some kind of nightmare that's not really occurring? It just doesn't make any sense. When I saw the rainbow over the White House in Obama's presidency, it's like, man, this has got to be a bad dream. But of course, it is reality. These things have advanced to where in the old days, which wasn't right, homosexual community was persecuted and mistreated, and gays were killed and such because of that. Instead of us doing Christian witness and care towards them, some of these things occurred. We know that. Fine, that wasn't supposed to happen. And in my day, when I was in high school, anybody who was thought to be gay was beat up, and that was wrong. But that's what they did in those days. And of course, anybody could say at any time that homosexuals, gays, and of course the Q word was used a lot in those days, those people were immoral, they were wrong. You could say that publicly, and almost everybody, including politicians, would be behind you on that. But just in the last 10, 15 years, things have changed. Even Obama was against gay marriage until I think after he won his second election. Isn't that amazing? It's fascinating. And so the media and obviously movies and music, Hollywood, they all promote the gay lifestyle and all these different transgender issues and so forth. And they just try to weaken a little bit at a time, more and more and more. And unfortunately, it seems to work in some ways. But we as Christians, we must stand for the truth. And not in a mean-spirited, nasty way, but in a firm way, yes. In a robust way, yes. But with love, with mercy, and with truth. Yes, with truth. So we argue our case. We demonstrate our case through living the word itself in our lives, but we also must speak the truth, as Paul said, in love. But we must speak the truth. And so it's sad what's going on in the UK there with Franklin Graham. All he wants to do is present Jesus to these folks and tell them that they can have a chance at a better life, because we know that's true. Those who follow Scripture generally have, in a general way, we know there's exceptions, but in a general way, have a much better life than those folks with their same demographics who aren't going by the Bible. That's just a fact. And we know it makes sense. When you do things according to the ethics that the New Testament outlines and tells us to do, these things unfold more and more in your life. If you don't, if you go off the rails and start doing all these immoral acts, your life gets worse and worse and worse. That's just the way it works. And we know that. So let's pray for these poor folks. Franklin Graham was reaching out to this poor town in the UK that was just full of corruption, full of drugs, full of just unhealthy practices, and full of payday loan companies ripping off the poor. Just really, really sad. So let's pray for that. Now let's get into the new pick by Trump for the Supreme Court. Brett Kavanaugh seems to be a really solid pick. That's the term I would use. But I also thought that, my political investigations, if you will, started in the mid and late 1980s when I was a young man starting to vote, and I was able to get immersed in some of these issues under Reagan's administration. And I noticed that Reagan, as well as the first Bush, they appointed some folks as basically conservative Christians or conservative politicians that Reagan and Bush were, and thinking that these particular appointees would also be conservative. And some of them didn't. Some of them did not uphold conservative values. Some of them did not uphold the Constitution in a consistent manner. We saw that with David Souter. We saw that with Kennedy. We saw that with O'Connor. We saw this with a lot of folks that the Republicans picked. Now, I don't know. Somebody may be able to educate me here, and that's fine. It'll help our audience too. Has there ever been a case at least within, say, the last 75 or 100 years, where Supreme Court justice was picked as, say, a moderate or liberal or progressive, whatever term you want to use, liberal or progressive, even a moderate, any case where a Supreme Court justice was picked that way and they then started leaning strongly conservative. I can't think of one, if you will, had turned conservative. I can't. Now, I can think of a lot that were elected or were appointed by conservative presidents thinking they were going to go by the Constitution in a faithful manner and were conservative that did not. They started leaning more and more left. Here's a case in point. Anthony Kennedy, which unfortunately Kavanaugh has a friendship with and a relationship with and seemed to be even mentored in some sense by Kennedy. Yikes. Why? Because Kennedy, yes, he's upheld some really important decisions recently or voted for them in a proper manner. He stayed with the Constitution in numerous places recently. But this guy, Kennedy, he almost every single chance he had upheld abortion. Upheld abortion year after year after year. And he was the deciding vote, if you will, in the gay marriage vote that won by one vote. So his vote, Anthony Kennedy, changed the whole course of what marriage is in the United States, and then all the states fell like dominoes, and they all now, it's federally mandated that gays can be married, and that's mainly because of Anthony Kennedy. Anthony Kennedy is the guy who helped mentor this guy that Trump has. Now, I know, some people I've hung out with, you say, well, Pastor Mike hung out with this guy at one point in his life, and look what this guy was. So then that means Pastor Mike's a bad guy. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this. When Souter came, when Kennedy came, when O'Connor came, red flags didn't pop off in my brain. I thought, oh yeah, they look solid, they look strong, they'll be good. And they messed up in a lot of ways, very important ways. So I'm just saying this. Obviously, he's probably going to get through. Hello, Jennifer. So good to have you. He's going to probably get through the process and be on the Supreme Court. And he's probably going to be very, very solid. I hope he's in the way that Justice Thomas is and Scalia was. I hope he goes in that direction. I don't think he will be that strong. And I just hope he doesn't go and fall back to where Kennedy fell back to as far as some slight liberal leanings in some important cases, because that's what happened to Kennedy. Don't forget, Kennedy did get it right in a lot of cases, but he also, as a swing vote, got it wrong in some very, very important cases, which some of them were just so, on the face, easy for him to go with the Constitution, and he didn't. The marriage case, the gay marriage case, is a great example. Just allow the Constitution to do what it did. Allow the states to do what they do best. Nope. They wanted to mandate federally gay marriage, and that's really, really sad because nobody elected them. They went against what they were supposed to do under the Constitution. So that's Kavanaugh. I pray that he'll end up being really, really good. I hope he doesn't become a Souter. I don't think he will. I don't think he'll become a Kennedy, but I said all that information just so you have an idea. There is a slight possibility that could happen at some point, but I hope not. Justice Roberts has been very, very solid in many, many cases, but he's also veered off a little bit of the Constitution at times. Now, here's something that could be interesting. I hope these guys don't think this way. Me, as a person who tends to have a critical thinking cap on at times, perhaps too often, here's how I kind of think about it. Can one of these guys that's not really, really strong, whether it's a new guy, if he gets in, which he probably will, Kavanaugh, or perhaps Roberts. I don't think any of the other conservative justices would do this. But could one of them ever think this way? I hope they don't. I'm not imputing this to anybody because I don't know this, obviously. But do they ever think, you know what? I can go and replace Kennedy, if you will, as a swing vote. If I replace Kennedy as a swing vote, my name will be in headlines for years and years and years. Everybody will look to me as the guy who actually makes the decision on a lot of these cases. I'll go down in history. Now, I hope they don't go that direction. I don't think Justice Roberts needs to because he's already on the Supreme Court as the lead guy, so why would he need to be, right, as the Chief Justice? Hopefully that's good enough for them. Hopefully they have a grip on their humility and aim for that and aim for the Constitution. If they aim for the Constitution, we don't have to worry about that. But if they aim for something to do with their own agenda, then we might have something to concern ourselves with. Now, the next headline is concerning the cross-shaped monument. Now, notice this monument was put up for World War I, those folks that died in World War I in the United States. It was put up in 1925. And it's a case that's linked in Maryland, where they have this, what they call the Peace Cross in Bladensburg, Maryland. I've never been there, but I've seen the pictures. The lower courts had atheists and humanists want to destroy and take down this huge cross that's been there since 1925, honoring the dead from World War I. They want to take it down. Their idea was just to rip off the arms of that cross. Wow, desecrated that way. Unbelievable. These guys, if they don't believe in God, why does it bother them so much? I mean, you know that they obviously know God exists. There's something within them that truly hates God. It's sad. This suppression of God's truth in their lives is such a passion to some of these guys that they have to try to take something down from 1925, almost 100 years ago. The appeals court, the federal appeals court, ruled that cross is unconstitutional. So we got to pray that it gets kicked up to the Supreme Court, that they take the case and they rule correctly. Hopefully they will. It's hard to say if they'll even take the case. If they don't, what will happen is that case will then stand. That cross will be removed, or the arms will be taken off, one that's been there since 1925, and then that will be used as a case to go after cross after cross after cross, religious symbol after religious symbol on public or government property. Amazing, isn't it? That's sad, really sad. Perhaps the one lawyer said, who's advocating for the case on the side of keeping the cross, he said, the tomb of the unknown soldier is a World War monument as well. And it says on the side, here lies a soldier known but to God. And then he asked, are they going to remove that? Of course they would want to, right? That's unconstitutional if the other is. This is just lunacy, just a crime. I'm really, really saddened by this. These things have been going on for decades now, where these guys, the humanists and the extreme leftists, find some religious symbol that they don't like and they want to take it down and so forth. And so this is one that might be so important that it could affect all the religious symbols and government property throughout the country. So keep that also in prayer. Now the biggest and saddest story is another story on the religion of peace. Now, throughout history, Islam has had some moments and some leaders that were peaceful. But if you go by the text of the Quran, there's certain elements within it that seem to strongly promote killing the infidel, even laying in wait for them and killing them. And so there's some very violent aspects to the Quran, also as well as a hadith. Most Muslims, at least the scholars, and it trickles down to the laity, if you will, uphold the hadiths as something inspired by God, almost on the level of the Quran, and it has to be obeyed, part of the Sunnah, if you will. And so it's similar to Orthodox Jews' view of the Talmud. So it's analogous. It's not completely the same, but it's analogous to how the Jewish or the Orthodox Jews view the Talmud, that they look at the Torah and they also look at the Talmud. And Muslims look at the Quran as well as the Hadith, especially those Hadiths that seem to be verified in their minds by their own scholars. And within those texts, it does say to kill the infidel. Hello, Stephen. It's good to have you. And it does say that Jews and Christians are the infidel. But it contradicts itself, because in earlier verses in the Quran, it upholds the biblical revelation of the Torah and the Psalms and the Gospels. It upholds, of course, Jesus as the Messiah. And it upholds a lot of good things, although the Quran itself is not a good book. I'm sorry, it just isn't. I wish I could say that. I've read it and it's not. And it's part of the problem. Now, can they take that book and reinterpret it and focus only on the peaceful verses and such? That should be our prayer. Our number one prayer should be for the conversion of the Muslims to come to Christ, the Prince of Peace, and his love. That should be our main prayer. Yes, we need to do that. We need to reach out to Muslims. What's great about the show is when we put this on YouTube, we have numerous Muslims throughout the world listening to this particular broadcast. So this is good news that we have them. Some are getting saved. This is a wonderful thing. So keep them in prayer. People from Africa and the Middle East and so forth. So keep that in mind as we're going through here. But this so-called religion of peace, unfortunately, at times isn't. The average Muslim citizen in the West tends to be a peaceful person, obviously, tends to just want to raise their family and to go forward in the Western world, yet understanding and embracing their own culture and rejecting killing the infidel, many of them. But there's also a lot of research, troubling research, by polling companies that have polled most of the countries in the Middle East, those that have a large Muslim majority. In most of those countries, when they're asked this question, is committing a suicide bombing okay under Sharia law, and is it okay with you? And the large percentage of the population has said yes. Okay, now would they strap on the bombs themselves? No, the majority of the population would say no. But for advancing Islam, if someone blasphemed Muhammad by making a cartoon, they would say, yes, that person deserves to die. So we need to help change that mindset for those folks that uphold that. There's a lot of Muslims that do not uphold that. And so we rejoice in that. But we have to understand that we have to target, if you will, with our prayers and with our love and with the truth, the Muslims, especially those who uphold any views of terrorism or killing the infidel. That's what we must do. Hello, Harry. It's good to see you, my brother. And so here's one troubling thought, and this is a fact. You can go to almost any Muslim country, Muslim majority country, and go to any of their cities of a Muslim majority country where it's a Muslim majority population in that city, and preach the gospel in the corner and hand out Bibles and Christian tracts. And the odds are great, severe, that you would be arrested or you would be dragged through the city and killed. That's just a fact. That's a plain fact that we have to deal with. And a lot of the citizens would say that is a righteous deed to kill these people who are advocating a religion contrary to Islam. And so that's kind of the mindset that we have to deal with. Yes, there has been atrocities committed by people who said they were Christians over the centuries. We know that. We've seen the Crusades, which were also well, I shouldn't say generally, but aspects of them were a defensive mechanism against the advance of Islam. And then they ran the Crusades, if you will. The campaigns ended up going into some tragedy and some horrific acts against Jews and Muslims. Okay, so that's history. So that happened. We also know the Inquisition, but the Inquisition isn't as big and as broad as you might think it is. There's some new material on the Inquisitions, and most of them will tell you something similar to this. Now, any killing in the name of Jesus and in a righteous manner is wrong, wrong, wrong. We should not kill in the name of Jesus. Yes, defending your country under your flag and doing that righteously in a just war is fine. But forgetting that for a moment, putting that to the side, killing in the name of Jesus, no, 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 never. So even though some commentators have made this comment, rightfully so, that Stalin killed more people in the name of communism and his atheism in one day than that died in the entire Inquisition. Now, that does not mean that Inquisition was good, but the amount of people killed in witchcraft trials in America is very, very small. Again, one person killed in an unrighteous way in the name of Christ is too many. It should never, ever happen. It's an atrocity, should not happen. We know that. We agree with that. But it's been a small amount of people, and you can look that up, especially some of the newer material. Look at the newer material on the Inquisition, and you'll see it wasn't the millions. It wasn't the hundreds of thousands that were killed. It was a much smaller number than that. Again, nobody should be executed for religious crimes in the name of Christ. That should never, ever happen. But Islam today generally thinks, their scholars think, many of their leaders think, some of the laity think, that it's good to kill people who make up cartoons of Muhammad or desecrate their religion in any way or convert to another religion. And that's just the fact, and that's a horrible fact. And so that gets us to the next story, a very unfortunate story, a horrific story of over 6,000 Nigerian Christians were killed. It's now called the deadliest place for Christians is now in the world, Nigeria. Nigeria, if you know the geography, it's almost 50-50 Muslim north, Christian south. Not quite. It could be more 60-40. It's hard to say with the demographics. But generally, it's almost split in half, with the Christians in the south and the Muslims in the north. And the Muslims some of them take it as their right to kill Christians in the name of Islam, including in Nigeria, where children have been murdered this week in their beds, doing nothing to no one, simply being a Christian. Now, we know that the Boko Haram, this terror group, is a threat and has done a lot of damage in those kind of areas. But the recent attacks that have been against Christians in Nigeria are coming from a different group, mainly these tribal herdsmen that are Muslims. And so they're coming in there and trying to take the land for financial gain, and they're killing Christians. And just recently, 6,000 Christians have died at the hands of the religion of peace of Islam just recently, just because they were Christians and just because those Islamic herdsmen wanted their property and their land. One guy, international human rights attorney, Emmanuel Ogilvy, said this: "What we have is a genocide. They are trying to displace the Christians and trying to possess their land. They're trying to impose a religion on the so-called infidels and pagans whom they consider Christians to be." Now, this particular guy, Ogilvy, recently lost his family members, including a relative who was pregnant. They killed her even though she was pregnant. Amazing. They went into their home and they killed their 4-year-old son, Christians being killed this way, and their 6-year-old daughter who was asleep in their beds. Christian little children asleep in their beds, killed in the name of Islam. And the leftists say, we don't have a problem. Many of the government officials in the West say we don't have any problem. That the problem is people who are attacking Muslims verbally and assert things against Islam that shouldn't be asserted. They say that's the problem. I say there's problems perhaps on both sides. Perhaps we shouldn't fire up certain rhetoric to try to, obviously, to get people worked up so that they would attack Muslims. We don't want that. We want to see Muslims saved. We want to see them come to the Redeemer. We want them to understand the love that God has for them through the love of Jesus Christ, dying on the cross and rising from the grave on the third day. This is what we want. But we also want the terror to stop. We know the answer isn't just bombs. Yes, militarily, there might need to be bombs in certain regions. I'm not a general. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to advocate for this military. All I know is it must be a just war by biblical standards. If it is, let the generals and the president do what they must do. But our job as Christians, as those who are in ministry or those who are laity, we are to pray for the Muslims. We're to reach out to the Muslims online. We are to have Muslims as friends if we have them within our area to do that and witness to them. I had a Muslim roommate when I first got saved. This guy, man, when I saw Genesis talking about the sons of Ishmael being a wild man of a donkey, I thought, wow. I'm not saying, this was this one guy, right? I won't give his name. But he was a roommate. He was a Muslim. And one reason I had him as a roommate so I could witness to him. So he hated Khomeini. He came from Iran. So I used that as leverage to open him up to the gospel. Just talk about the horrors of Khomeini and all that, and then bring him to the contrast of Jesus. It's so easy to compare Islamic mullah to Jesus because there is no comparison, right? So comparing Ayatollah Khomeini, who this guy hated, this Muslim hated, which was interesting, to Jesus was real easy. And after about a year, the guy got saved. went to church, changed his life, became a Christian. Not because I'm some kind of superstar. No, I was young in the faith at that point. I didn't know much at all, right? I just started getting into some apologetics and such. I did care for him. I did care for the truth. And I wanted to see him get saved. And so that's what we need to do with those folks in our lives, is to see less and less of this terrorism. Part of the solution is prayer. Well, people say, oh, I guess we can just pray. No, we get to pray. Prayer, if it's under God's sovereign will, the power of that resource is unbelievable, is infinite, it's eternal, because it comes from God. If God answers a prayer, it's his power and his purpose being fulfilled, and no man can fight that. So it's not just, oh, I guess we can just pray. No, we get to pray, and God will answer these prayers. And I know any of us out there, I've never met a Christian, I know there's some out there, but I've just never met one that's praying enough for Muslims and praying enough for leftists. Why do leftists always support Islam? Isn't that weird? It's almost like some kind of psychological self-hatred, because some of the first folks that Islamic terrorists will go after are people that hold a leftist worldview. So it's really, really odd. And of course, most leftists say they really, really want to go for women's rights and gay rights. And guess what source has the worst gay rights and women's rights in the world? Of course, it's Islam. Islamic countries. That's just another unhappy fact. It's an unpleasant fact. So these Muslim herdsmen have killed as many as 60,000 Christians since 2001. So far, just this year, 6,000 Christians, men, women, and children, pregnant women, have been killed by these Muslims. Ogilvy said, by eliminating Christians, a group can dominate the north and central Nigeria politically and economically. And so these Christian children are being murdered in their beds, and it just grieves me. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a Nigerian pastor in my house, and wonderful man of God, really, really loved Jesus. He really understood Islam, and he understood Christianity. Obviously, he had a Nigerian slant to it, but he was Orthodox biblically. I mean, Orthodox in the sense of biblical. And very powerful man of God. And I was able to mentor him for quite a few weeks. It was really a blessing. Have him in my home for food and talk to him. And he talked about certain herbs that could help, because I'm a nutritionist. Certain herbs that you can only get in Nigeria that could help clear up colds and flus and such. And it was very, very interesting. But that wasn't the main part. Obviously, we talked mainly about Jesus. We talked about apologetics. We talked about why Christianity is true. And he really, really loved my books. And he said, Pastor Mike, is there any way that you can send me your books and give me the text so that I can translate them into different languages, including Arabic, which will help reach some of the northern folks up in North Africa? Because he's not just thinking of Nigeria, he's thinking of reaching the folks in North Africa and the Middle East. And I said, of course you can. Go ahead. And so I said, all you have to do is email me, and I'll get you that material. He goes, can I have your Bible school material also? I go, no problem. Use it any way you want to use it. And so he emailed me, and I sent him all the material. And he sent me back a thank you letter that just really, really blessed my heart to know that to have a little tiny little part into this guy's ministry in Nigeria, where he's educating Christians, these simple Christians out there that they don't have all that we have, materially speaking. They can't shut the door. Some of them, that getting close to central or northern Nigeria, they can't lock their door at night, not knowing that someone's going to break through it with a sword and kill them in the name of Islam. It's really, really sad. If you want more, you can get my book, Refuting Allah, Proving Jesus. It's on Amazon. You might like that. It's a unique take on Islam in the sense that I go after the ontology of Allah and his revelation. So I really get into the philosophical, theological, and ontological aspects of Allah. And I haven't seen another book like it. I know this might sound like boasting. I don't mean to be. But you might want to get that book if you're interested in Islam at all. Again, that's Refuting All Out Proving Jesus by Mike Robinson. You get that on Amazon if you want. But let's pray for these folks tonight in Nigeria. 6,000 killed by the so-called religion of peace just because they were Christians. Babies in the mother's womb with a sword stuck through that belly just because it was a Christian baby, if you will. Children, little toddlers, killed in their beds at night just because they were Christians. If you tell me there's not a real evil in the world, I would just tell you, read the newspapers. Maybe not some of the progressive newspapers and magazines. They tend not to cover some of these atrocities, especially if it's involved Christians. Though, if they do cover it, it'll be very, very brief, and it won't focus on and give an exposition of what's happened. Hello, Ian. It's so good to have you. But even some of the more conservative news media doesn't cover these issues as much as they should. I mean, when you think about 6,000 Christians being killed just this year by Muslims, by Muslim herdsmen, to gain their property, and because they are, I quote, infidels and pagans, because they're Christians, with their babies being killed in their wombs, with the children being massacred in their beds. If there can't be some outrage with us Christians, I don't mean foaming at the mouth, frothing at the mouth, and acting like a bunch of idiots and screaming and yelling, but I mean a forceful rebuke of the media and our culture that either downplays or ignores these atrocities. Because I would plead to President Trump or any of his cabinet to really, really get on these areas. Not just Christians, any minority or any group that's being persecuted and there's atrocities being applied to them, we should try to advocate for. But to be completely ignored almost is just unbelievable. It's horrible. It's outrageous. It shouldn't happen. And it just breaks my heart. And I just know that I'm going to pray more and more for them, for my brothers and sisters, because I have a personal connection, like I mentioned, and I really, really do care. It's not just seeing a story on YouTube. It's not just reading an article in some magazine. But these are real people who really believe in Jesus, and they die just because of that belief, so that these Muslim herdsmen can take their property and get them and sweep them off that area for political and economic gain as a call down Allah's wrath upon them to kill the infidel. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, let's get to some more good news here. That doesn't mean we shouldn't pray for those. I meant that. I'm going to have them at the top of my prayer list. The Muslims are being persecuted in Nigeria. But archaeologists dug up the ancient city of Shiloh. Isn't that amazing? I love this stuff. The poor Book of Mormon, you can try to dig up all the cities and you find nothing, right? Because it's a fictional work, right? Joseph Smith copied and plagiarized some other people's work and came up with this book, right? That's the Book of Mormon. And even the Quran, it's interesting. There's no historical or archaeological evidence that comes within 200 years of the Quran. We have manuscripts that are much later than that, which is also real interesting. And that's why there's been some books that seem to be fascinating and interesting that have advocated that Muhammad never even existed. Now, I don't buy into that, but it could be. There's some real interesting ideas there. I know they've tried to do that with Jesus, but Jesus, we have copies of the New Testament, 125 AD of the Gospel of John and other manuscripts, as well as historical works that were around the time of Jesus and thereafter. So we have evidence from close to the time of Jesus versus Muhammad doesn't seem to have any evidence about him or the Quran until about 2 centuries or more afterwards. You can, deal with that as you want to, but I do know that in the Bible, almost every time they put a shovel in the dirt in Israel, they find some more proof and evidence for the Bible. So it's real fascinating. I remember, well, I don't remember, but I've read where until the early 20th century, skeptics and scoffers would mock at the Bible saying, well, the Bible talks about the Hittites and there's no proof for the Hittites. What's going on with that? This proves that the Bible's wrong. No proof for the Hittites. And they would pound and pound that until there was proof for the Hittites found in the early 20th century. Then they would say, oh, there's no proof for the Pontius Pilate outside the Bible and so forth. You know, we don't really know that Pilate lived until 1961, where they found some archaeological proof, some solid proof dated at the time of Pilate in Caesarea. 1961 it was found. Then, of course, King David. Oh, King David never existed. There's no way. That's just a big fairy tale. That's just a big myth. Until the 1990s, when an inscription of the House of David was found. 1990s, where proof for King David was found. That's amazing. I watched a whole documentary on King David and in the House of David and how they found it and what it means. Real powerful stuff. But notice this, all these and many other places, until they were found, the skeptics would just laugh and mock and scoff. Oh, the Bible can't be true because we haven't found this, we haven't found that. But then they keep finding more and more stuff in the 20th century and the 21st century. It's amazing. It's stunning. You know, it's fascinating to me. Of course, it's compelling to find all this material. Of course, finding material, that itself is not in the actual, in principle, isn't proof for the existence of God, isn't obviously proof for Jesus' claims. We know that. But it is evidence, if you want to use it in a more technical term, evidence for much of what the New Testament and the Old Testament talks about. So we have that, which is fascinating. I'm going to try to get into some more proofs later and see what you guys think about these. So that's our news, and some of it's bad and some of it's good. Some of it's hard to say right now, like with the Chief Justice, whether he's going to be good or not. You guys can let me know if you think Kavanaugh's going to be good. I think he's a very solid choice. I think I have high hopes that he probably will be good. But like I said earlier, I had those same high hopes for Kennedy and Souter and Sandra Day O'Connor, and I was wrong. I was younger then, maybe a little naive, but you know, the conservatives thought that they would be pretty good, and they weren't in certain important cases. And I don't think Kavanaugh's gonna do that, and I hope he doesn't, and I pray that he doesn't. But what do you guys think about out there? Do you think Kavanaugh's going to be a solid choice? Do you think he might even be at the level of Thomas and Scalia? Do you think he's going to be even better than perhaps Roberts, because Roberts compromised on a couple cases? We'll see. But what's your opinion on that? And so this is Cross and Crown Radio and the Gospel Truth Podcast. If you can, this really helps us. If you go to YouTube, we're on Facebook right now, but if you just vaunt over to YouTube for a second and subscribe to our channel, that helps a lot. If you're watching this via YouTube, if you can subscribe, it's kind of near the top, and then press that bell button next to it. That means you'll get the alerts. We've done hundreds and hundreds of videos. We've done videos on the evidence and proof of God. We've done videos on gun control. We've done videos on time travel. We've done some real interesting material on ontology and philosophy and theology, and of course, important biblical doctrines. We've talked about the Trinity, justification, imputation, propitiation. We have videos on all these things. Most of them are on apologetics and really powerful. You can go there, Cross and Crown Radio. We appreciate that. And if you can go there and subscribe, there's also a donation button, if you will, on our YouTube channel, Cross and Crown Radio. And we do obviously know this is right now here on Facebook. But let me give you a list, just a partial list. Now, you can get this whole list, this massive list that I have, in the book that I wrote, Fake Atheism. It's one of my newest books. I wrote a book about Trump and his faith. That's on Amazon. So is this book called Fake Atheism. It's by me, Mike Robinson. You can get that on Amazon. And I give a whole list of proofs. Now, Plantinga gave a big list years ago. I expounded and expanded on his list. So I give some exposition on some of the really important ones. Some of them you might think, and so forth. Some of them are very, very compelling. Many of them are very fascinating. And some of them, I think, are to me, give you an assurance for the existence of the biblical God. You can get that. Now, I'm just going to read some of the list. The list is too long to read. Again, you can get that whole list in that book that I wrote, Fake Atheism, including dozens and dozens of expositions on some of these proofs. And I put a lot of them in a unique structure that's called a transcendental structure. And you can check that out with that book, and you'll see what I mean. You'll get a little bit of the flavor of that when I go through one of my expositions on one of these proofs in just a few minutes. Okay? You get a little bit of a flavor of that. Because what I really believe, that God exists, and it's absolutely certain. It's not just the preponderance of evidence stacks up on the Christian side. Yes, I do believe that. It's not just that there's some really powerful, compelling proofs for Christianity. Yes, I believe that. But I go way, way beyond that, and I say there is absolutely certain and assured proof for the existence of the God of the Bible. Okay? And so let me go through some of this list. One would be the argument for the resurrection of Christ, powerful argument. The transcendental argument for logic, that would include the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of excluded middle. The argument from messianic prophecies, the argument from the uniqueness of Jesus, the argument from predication, the transcendental argument from causality, the argument from continuous personal identity, the argument from concepts, Taylor's ontological argument, Plantinga's ontological argument. He's not a big fan of his own argument, but I break that apart a little bit. The argument from mathematics, Robinson's modal tag. That's a real interesting argument I developed. It seems to be pretty unique. It's a take on Ritter's modal tag. I think mine's a stronger one, of course, because I wrote it. I would think that, right? The argument from propositions, and of course, the argument from truth. I have a different version of the argument from truth. I think it's pretty compelling. I think it's very interesting. And I like dialoguing with atheists about this, because some of these concepts, some of these truths, they haven't thought all the way through on, like most of us haven't. Okay, so I think it's pretty fascinating here. And let me give it to you. I'll give it to you. I'll try to go a little bit fast on this. Not too speedy, but a little bit fast. And then I'll try to break it down for you a little bit. And then if you want more, like I said, you can get my book, Fake Atheism. Immutable, transcendent, universal truth exists. Okay? And I give an example, 2 + 2 = 4. If you deny that, we got some interesting problems, and that's why I like talking to atheists or agnostics or skeptics or even non-Christians about this argument, okay? So if they deny that, then we got some real interesting discussion to go on. So the first one is immutable, transcendent, universal truth exists. Immutable, universal, and transcendent truth is ontologically universal and greater and loftier than the material cosmos or the human mind, since both the human mind and the cosmos lack immutability, universality, and transcendence. Okay? And that's also an interesting discussion. God is immutable, has universal power and reach, and is transcendent. God has the ontological capacity to account for immutable, universal, and transcendent truth. If immutable, universal, and transcendent truth, then God. That would be an interesting topic too, because a lot of atheists will deny that there is certain truth, or immutable truth even. Immutable, universal, transcendent truth, therefore God. Okay? So when they deny that, then I have a lot of areas I can explore with them and try to demonstrate that they have to keep going in certain irrational ways to try to deny the force of this argument. So it's really, really compelling. And I also get some Christians that try to discuss this argument too and may dislike it and want to explore it also. And I enjoy those conversations as well. With Christians, I want to be as charitable as possible. If they believe in the biblical Jesus Christ and that he died for their sins and rose again on the third day, and they truly believe in the God of the Bible, they're born again, they're my brother and sister. And so if we disagree on some of these ideas, some of these arguments, I'm okay with that. I can disagree with somebody about certain apologetic approaches, certain apologetic arguments, or even proofs in the technical sense, or evidences in the technical sense also. I don't mind disagreeing with folks about that. I love discussing it. I love kicking it around. And you should also. But I'll tell you this. I've researched this thing. I've researched the truth of Christianity since I got saved in 1979. I told you the story before, so I'm not going to rehash it in detail. But I got saved in a 7-Eleven store in 1979 as just a teenage professional baseball player. I had a great life. I didn't need God, at least I didn't think I did. I did, but I didn't think I did. I had a great life. I had girls, I had the car, I had the money, I had the job I wanted, professional baseball player. I had a wonderful family, although they were irreligious, didn't care about religion, never cared about it. And I get saved in a 7-Eleven by a Jesus people guy who gave me the gospel. Right there in the store I get saved, right? But after that, I went home and I said, wait a minute here. If I'm going to commit my whole life to this, this better be true. And if it's not true, I'm going to keep doing my life as I've done it. I'm just going to cast this aside and think of it as some kind of weak moment I had because I hadn't eaten my Hershey bar yet or drank my milk, which is the only reason I was in that 7-Eleven on Roscoe Boulevard in Van Nuys, California. So I go home. My dad had a large library, and we also had numerous public libraries there in the San Fernando Valley. And so what I did was I researched. I wanted to find out if there's any religion that's true, and to see if Christianity was true, or to see if atheism or agnosticism or even deism were true. I wanted to find that out. So I tried to be as honest as possible because I had no axe to grind at that point. I did not have a dog in the race yet. I didn't. I really didn't, because I preferred for my life to continue as it was. Hello, Danny. So glad to have you. And my life at that point was completely secular and atheist. I wasn't a hardcore atheist who hated everybody, but I lived as an atheist, and I was fine with that. And I loved playing baseball, and that's what my profession was. And I had all the girls, and I had the cars, and I had the money, and I had a great family. I didn't need anything. I lived in Southern California. In the off season, I'm surfing, right? I don't need anything. So if my life is going to completely change, it better be true. And what I mean by that, it better have a lot of evidence and proof for it. If not, forget it. So I researched all the major religions I could find, Hinduism being what's considered the oldest, and Buddhism, as well as Sikhism, which was kind of just before the Reformation. I went into those. I went in, obviously, into Judaism, which I found had compelling proof for it, but it no longer had an atonement after 70 AD, so that worried me. If I can commit my life to Judaism, and there's no atonement, how do I get rid of my sins? So that really bothered me. And so half my family was genetically Jewish, although nobody was practicing any religion. So that was attractive to me, except I didn't have a way to get rid of sins. And so it's got proof, but it's got no, I'm thinking, how does that work? It's got proof, all the prophecies within the Old Testament about certain cities and towns and people that came true. I'm not talking about the messianic prophecies, just the prophecies, that was just compelling. It was amazing. And the 10 Commandments were amazing. But then I'm stuck there with my sins, and so I don't know what to do with that. So I'm thinking, okay, let's go on. So I go on to Christianity, and then I was going to go after Christianity to Islam and then to Mormonism, and discuss and see if any of these religions had any evidence or proof for them. So Hinduism didn't have any that I found. Buddhism didn't. I did get into Sikhism, even though I had not studied Islam at that point yet. But I got into Sikhism, even though it's even after Christianity by about 14 centuries. But I just the way it worked. I tried to go in chronological order, but that one I got out of order. So I'm studying them all, found no proof, just basically men coming, some people that they thought were wise men, sages, gurus, prophets, that said they had these words from divinity, words from God, and that you should follow them because they're true. But they gave me no proof. It's just that they're true, right? I think, well, how do I know they're true? Well, they are. And I often use a story about this guy who came to me in the middle of the night, comes to me with a Coke can and a book that he wrote. He says, Mike, I wrote this book. This Coke can spoke to me, and I have this book now, and the can told me, give it to the world, and the world would get saved. And I say to my friend, well, how do I know that's true? Well, it is. I got the book. And I got some followers even. I go, well, how does that make it true? Well, because I got the book. And the Coke can did speak to me. I go, well, you might believe that. I don't know if you believe it or not, or you're making it up, but I don't know it. I didn't see it. You show me no proof. Give me some evidence. Well, here's the book. I go, that's not an evidence. All religions have a book. How do I know yours is true over theirs? Well, here it is. It is. The world will get saved by it. I go, no, that's not good enough for me. There's the door. See ya. Not good enough. I need proof, I need evidence. And that's what all the religions had. And up to that point, I really thought that people come to religion by what they think works best for them. They pick a religion like someone might pick a particular item in a salad bar. I like this, you like that, right? You like broccoli, I don't. So you pick broccoli, I don't. You like Hinduism, I don't, I pick Buddhism. That's what I really thought. I thought all religions are basically the same. Wrong. I believe that all religions basically have no proof. Wrong, as we're going to see. And I believe that everybody just kind of picks a religion because of what feels good. Wrong, wrong, wrong. And so I'm about to find this out. So I investigate Christianity, and I'm blown away. I couldn't believe the amount of evidence and proof for it. It shook me. It stunned me. I remember being in that apartment surrounded by all these books, by all these religions, and being surrounded by this like a wall of books. All my friends thought I lost my mind. Here's a irreligious professional baseball player, had the world by the tail. All of a sudden he's surrounding himself with religious books stacked to the ceiling all around him. And so there I am all around with all these books. And I saw all the proof for Christianity. Not all the proof. I saw a lot of proof for Christianity. It took years, and I still haven't seen all the proof, but the proof that I've seen is amazing. It's compelling. It's fascinating. It's stupendous. And so there I am. I remember crying out to God saying, I thank you so much, God, that you've given me a religion, a faith, that has all this proof. It blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind and changed my life. Because at that point, I was all in. I then investigated Islam and Mormonism. Those are other stories, including dating a Mormon gal. I won't talk about that tonight, but I found they were wrong, wrong, wrong. No proof, no evidence. I was all in. I was all into Christianity. And at that point, when I got home from my last season, I went to college campuses and raised up young people to witness and to bring apologetics to university campuses on the West Coast. And then when I moved to Hawaii, started working with the campuses on Hawaii and also the West Coast. And one of the West Coast campuses was UNLV, which is in Las Vegas. And God called me to plant a church out there in the early 1990s, and we did that, and that was a major blessing that we served that church for over 15 years. But now I'm in Granbury, Texas. Love it out here. I love Las Vegas all the time I was out there. You know it has to be from God if you move from Maui to Las Vegas, right? But Las Vegas was great. I mean, you might have your misconceptions about Las Vegas. I mean, every city with all of its pagans and all of its horrible stuff, you can say, oh, wow, there's a lot of bad stuff there. And there is. But for us in our church and our Christian community, it was great. We had a great time there. I don't regret one day. I loved it the first day I arrived in Las Vegas, which I made sure was after the summer. But we moved to Granbury, Texas, almost 6 years ago. Planted the church out here about 3 years ago. And we're planting another one in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we appreciate all your help. In fact, news bulletin. This is a little off topic, but I'll get back on topic in a second. Wow. This past week, we had our most donors ever on YouTube. So thank you guys so much. I know this is on Facebook right now, but our Facebook friends have really given a lot. We're up almost to $7,000. We appreciate this big week on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. I really mean that. You know there's a donation button there on our YouTube channel, Crossing Crown Radio. If you're listening to this on Facebook, you can go there and subscribe or donate. But man, really thank you so much for that. We don't thank you guys enough, but we should. And I'm going to try to improve upon that because, you know, to get this broadcast out there that's hitting on apologetic issues, giving an apologetic slant to all those things going around and going on in our world is a really powerful resource. And that's why, even though we've only been doing this since October, we now have almost 4,000 subscribers, thanks to you, and we're getting 3,000 to 10,000 views, sometimes 30,000 views on apologetic videos. Wow, amazing. Isn't that amazing? So thank you guys so much for all that. So the argument from truth, that was my version of it. I think that's really solid, and it's good to propose those things and talk about it. Now, there's a lot of atheists and agnostics that will say, well, there's absolutely no proof or evidence for Christianity. And you give them a list of them and maybe give a little bit of an exposition on them, either verbally or in person or online. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, you give me no evidence or proof. What they should be saying is, well, the evidence and proof you gave me, I've read it, I really pondered it, but it's not compelling. But obviously, they rarely read it, they rarely ponder it, and so they can't tell you that, right? So they just basically just try to swipe it away with their hand and say, you didn't give me any proof or evidence. What I do at that point, if they're really strident on that, oh, you've given me no proof and evidence, I don't just keep piling dozens and dozens and dozens of proofs more and more and just act like they're a little errand boy here. I tell them, no, you can go read my resources. Here's a link or two, but here's some questions for you, okay? Since you're saying I haven't given you any proof, let me ask you a few questions. And I would tell you, write down these questions or type them out on your smartphone, because these are good questions. I really, really believe when you're witnessing to somebody, especially if you have a little bit of time, and they seem to have a little bit of time, you show them how we're all sinners, God's law, we break God's law, and that we need a Savior. So you give them the law, then you give them the gospel, that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, was buried and rose again. You give them that, and then you give them a little bit of apologetics, right? I really believe you should try to do that with everybody possible. But if they're going to be belligerent, if they're going to be caustic, if they're going to be overly pugnacious, and then they tell you, you've given me nothing, 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 then ask them some questions. Or maybe ask them these questions anyways. Here's one for them, especially if they're online. Prove to me you exist, right? That's really, really hard for them to do it online. And if you want to know how to do that, you can contact me, message me here on Facebook, or contact me with a comment on our YouTube channel. We get hundreds and hundreds of comments every week on our YouTube channel, but believe it or not, we really, really try to contact all of our commenters, especially the atheists, agnostics, and doubly especially those people who get saved. We give them free material. We try to mentor them and make sure that they get some of our Bible school material, especially on the basics of the Christian faith and the reasons why it's true and so forth. And most of all, being centered on Jesus. That's just not words. That's what we really, really strive to do. So I would encourage you to do that same type of outline with folks online, because if you tend to be an introvert, if you say, well, gosh, I'm kind of shy, I'm not really an evangelist, and that's most of us Christians, you know. I'm not an extrovert by nature. I had to pray for that. Keith Green's music and his songs really, wow, they really convicted me and empowered me to go out and to share, even though I did not feel like it, even though everything within me was screaming, don't go, you know, you'll get rejected, you're too shy, don't do this. I try to crucify those kind of thoughts and those feelings and just say, I don't care what people think anymore. I don't care. I'm going to go forward and talk to people about the truth of Christianity, give them the law, give them the gospel. If I have time, give them some evidence and some proof, and talk to them about Jesus. That's what I'm going to do. So, ask them the question, prove to me you exist. That's a great question. Another one. How do you know your reasoning is valid? See, if you don't have the Christian worldview, you have to presuppose that your reasoning is valid, but you have no evidence, you have no proof, you have no foundation to support that claim. So you can explore that a little bit. Now, you don't have to know how to explore all these or to give an exposition on these. This is mainly a tactic if you're not really into philosophy or ontology or epistemology, or some of these maybe what people think are kind of loftier issues. If you're really, really not into that, you can still ask the questions, right? Just use it as a kind of a tactic to get them to stop telling you, you've given me no proof, when you have. And you can copy and paste anything that I've written or our team has written on YouTube. We comment with the atheist. We have robust comments, and we go after them. We want to see them saved. We also want to stop up their mouths, right? So we try to be patient. We're trying to be kind, and we want them to have a dialogue first. But if they're just going to come roaring in and be nasty and be belligerent and not have a dialogue and just start cussing and cursing and calling us names, then we're going to talk to them in very firm ways, very robust ways. And so that's kind of the way that we try to do it. And so the next question is, do you know anything for certain? That's an interesting question. Most atheists, at least recent ones that I've talked to, say no to that. I haven't seen any polling on atheism in that question, so I can't say that 90% of atheists would affirm that or not. But I do know in my limited, which are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of atheists, thousands and thousands over the years, when I ask them, do you know anything for certain? Most of them, in fact, the great majority of them say no. Now they're really in a dilemma, right? When they say they know nothing for certain, all you have to do is ask, are you certain of that? And that will open up some more areas to explore and kind of stifles their mouth a little bit, right? Which is kind of what you want. You want to shut down their mouth a little bit and open up their ears. And so then another question you can ask, can you be wrong about everything you know? Believe it or not, I wouldn't say most atheists would say yes to that, but a lot of them do, okay? And that gives you another opening. And so now, just a minute, I'm going to get into a preview of our Dead Sea Scrolls show we're going to do tomorrow night. Lord willing, of course. This show is going to be on YouTube tomorrow, but tomorrow night on Facebook Live, late at night on Texas, we're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and some interesting Hebraic ideas about it and how it applies to the New Testament, how it gives us some evidence for the biblical text, for the New Testament narratives, and the truth of Jesus Christ. We're going to get into that in just a moment, as well as in an expanded way tomorrow. I'm just briefly going to cover it tonight for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to do a long exposition on that tomorrow night on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some fascinating material. A lot of you know that I really have studied the Hebraicness of the Gospels and got into what David Biven and Dr. Roy Blizzard and some others, Brad Young, have demonstrated that there seems to be a strong Jewish mindset, which obviously makes sense, behind the Gospels and understanding a lot of the rabbinic literature and the Midrash and the Talmud and the Targums behind the thought patterns of the Jewish people in the Second Temple Judaism helps us understand the text better and brings out some gems and some nuggets that are absolutely fascinating and compelling that would demonstrate that these texts could not be given 100 years or so after Jesus, or even 70 years after Jesus was raised from the dead. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But if you can, go to our Cross and Crown radio show, and you can subscribe there. And also, there's a donation button. And if you don't want to go there, you can text 84321 on your smartphone. This really, really helps. We get a lot of our support on Facebook by our text messaging. You just text the number 84321. The amount you want to give, you put in the text message area, and then you go to Life Church and you give. And that money that comes from Facebook goes straight into the show and to our church plant. So we really appreciate you doing that, because we're trying to be hard-hitting, not in the sense of being belligerent and nasty, but hard-hitting in the sense of not compromising, to go forth with these things. Some things are very black and white, and to go after that. The biblical text is true. The revelation that God gave us in Jesus Christ is absolutely certain. And everything that flows from that, the general equity of the New Testament ethics, have to be weighed upon and imprinted upon my life as an individual, my marriage and my home, my church, my community, as well as the western part of the world and even the whole world. Although Jesus would probably come back before that happens, unless you're post-mill. So that's what we're trying to do here. So you can text 84321 and go to Life Church, give as God would put on your heart, or go to our YouTube channel, and then you can go to the donation button and give as God would put on your heart. We really appreciate it. You're helping us plant that church, and you're helping keep the show reaching Muslims, atheists, agnostics, Hindus. In fact, I wrote a book on Hinduism, very unique take on it. Again, it explores the epistemic issues, the ontology issues of Hinduism and its God and gods, as well as reincarnation. Very unique exploration of Hinduism that you can get. It's called Hinduism and the Religion of the Gods and Karma by Mike Robinson. You can see that on Amazon. But let's get back to the heart of the matter. And that would be the Dead Sea Scrolls. A fragment in Cave 4 speaks of a Messiah type of person, a leader, more than a prophet, if you will, person who comes, and I quote, whom the heavens and the earth will obey. That's interesting literature there. Notice what it says again. This is very, very fascinating. Because remember, some of the skeptics, as well as some modern Jewish people, will say, well, a kind of divine Messiah is absent from Judaism, Second Temple Judaism, in that area. But here, notice, let me read that again. This type of messianic figure is going to be one whom the heavens and the earth obey. Wow. Wow. That's not just a mere man. That wouldn't seem to be just a mere angelic creature, right? And so we can see how that lines up a lot with what Jesus said about his power and his authority. In 1947 is when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Israel, which is interesting, by a Muslim boy. Isn't that interesting? Tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. That God doesn't use irony, right? So a Muslim boy throws a rock in a cave and he hears pottery, right? The sound of pottery with the rock. So he goes in there, and there's where, in that particular cave, some of the most important scrolls were found. And then they started digging in the other caves, and they found massive amount of material of the Old Testament. In fact, every book in the Old Testament was found in the caves except for one, and that's Esther. Isn't that interesting? So all the books of the Old Testament were found, and the commentaries that they found there, they only had commentaries if they were on a book, no books on the Apocrypha. Only books of the Bible had commentaries when it comes to the books of literature. There was other commentaries of their religious ideas and their religious texts, but not on any books that were in place at that point, except for biblical books, which is real interesting for the 39 or say 38 books of the Old Testament, right? So that's found in 1947, and the Hebrew text of it is almost identical to the Hebrew text that we have dated 1000 AD. So we didn't have a copy of a large copy of the Old Testament text earlier than 1000 AD. We only had really small fragments. But the 1000 AD text that we have lines up, especially in the book of the prophet of Isaiah, lines up almost perfect with the book of Isaiah. There's some variance within spelling and certain pronouns, but very, very little difference, just 1,000 years apart, proving that God upholds his text, that God's sovereign hand has preserved the text of Scripture. That's really fascinating. So in Cave 1 was the outstanding scroll of the book of Isaiah. It's fascinating if you could go to Israel and see in the museum, it's 24 feet long. Wow. Hello, Dean. It's good to have you. 24 foot long of the prophet Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, including, get this, Isaiah 9:6, which talks about a child is going to come, a son will be given, and his name is going to be Mighty God, Everlasting Father, speaking of the Messiah, which is Jesus, has that, has Psalm 7:14, or Isaiah 7:14 in it. Remember the Septuagint of Isaiah 7:14, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. It has the word virgin translated from the Hebrew word there, Alma. So that's interesting, right? So it's not just a New Testament idea. It's also a Jewish idea before Jesus came in the Septuagint. Now, also in Isaiah 53, within the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see the text of the suffering servant outlined right in there, that he would be persecuted, that he would be stricken, that he would justify many, and all these things that are in Isaiah 53 are also in the scroll that's 24 feet long of the prophet Isaiah. It's really amazing. The one scholar said this: it's just like the book of Isaiah that we have in the text that we have 1000 AD. Some minor variants, mostly spelling differences and apparent slips of the pen, but nothing that alters doctrinal teaching in the famous 53rd chapter of the book of Isaiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, we're going to cover this in detail tomorrow night, Lord willing. There's 8 complete manuscripts of the book of Daniel. With this, I'll be done with the Dead Sea Scrolls tonight. We'll get into this in a larger way tomorrow. But this is fascinating. This you really have to get. The book of Daniel, skeptics really, really love to attack. It's a book that is mostly Hebrew, but it has some Aramaic. Aramaic is a sister language of Hebrew, but it's different than Hebrew, right? And so a lot of people think Jesus spoke Aramaic. And there's some Christians in Iraq and Syria, although they've been persecuted and many of them driven away, that also still speak Aramaic, right? The language they think Jesus spoke. I kind of lean on Jesus speaking Hebrew as his main language, or at least one of his main languages. He obviously spoke Aramaic because we can see him quoting Aramaic in the New Testament, but we also see him speaking in a Hebraic mindset, not an Aramaic mindset with certain words. And what's really profound is when Paul talks about Jesus and Jesus appearing to him, he talks about it in 2 places in the book of Acts, in both places, although modern versions translate the word Hebrew into the word Aramaic, which is interesting. Shows kind of a bias, because the word there in Greek is Hebrew. There's a separate word for Aramaic, and it doesn't use that word. And you can see that in New King James and the Old King James and some of the older translations translate it rightly as Hebrew, because it says that when Jesus came and gave Paul the laser light show and drove him into the dust, when Jesus came and appeared to Paul and drove him in the dust, it says, Paul says that Jesus spoke to me in Hebrew. So that's interesting. So the only place that it tells us what language Jesus spoke was Hebrew. Okay, so Jesus spoke Hebrew, and Paul says that twice. And there's other factors that go into that. We know the Talmud was written in Hebrew, that the Jewish people said they mandated that you can only speak Hebrew in the temple. So there's other reasons why we think that Jesus spoke Hebrew. Did he speak Hebrew mainly? That's up for debate. Most scholars say that Jesus spoke mainly Aramaic, and he may have spoke some Hebrew, and he may have spoke some Greek. Okay, that's what most scholars say. I tend to think that Jesus spoke a lot of Hebrew and spoke a lot of Aramaic and probably spoke a lot of Greek also. But in the book of Daniel, written in Hebrew and Aramaic, Dead Sea Scrolls found, we see a portion, I should say, of the Aramaic text of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, what this means is that the original writing of Daniel in the 6th century BC is consistent with conservative biblical scholarship. The liberal scholarship wants to say, well, Daniel was written just before the time of Christ. It's written really, really late. But we have this older Aramaic Daniel, which is a very distinct, here's the key, a very distinct form of Aramaic of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 2nd century non-biblical manuscripts. So the evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls supports a high view of the precision of the Bible, of its manuscript preservation, and its transmission by God's sovereign hand. The Dead Sea Scrolls manuscript evidence refutes a critic's claim that the predictive material of Daniel was written after the fulfillments, because the type of Aramaic that's used is used 200 years before Jesus came. Of course, most conservatives believe that Daniel's written even before that, but it cannot be written in the sense of the liberal view of maybe 30 years before Christ or 100 years before Christ, because the Aramaic goes back further than that. So the truths about the Dead Sea Scrolls are many. Let me just give you a few, just give you a taste for what we're going to cover tomorrow night. And we're going to really get into the Hebraicness of the New Testament and how this touches on that, how this expands and confirms much of the things that we know from the New Testament, okay? The truths about the Dead Sea Scrolls, number one, they were found by accident by a Muslim shepherd. Interesting, isn't it? In the 1940s. Some of them were discovered later, but the 1940s, a great crop of them were found. They were written mostly in Hebrew, but also some Aramaic and some Greek. The dates of them are 250 BC to the time just before Christ came for the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some date a few of them after that. Fascinating, isn't it? We'll cover that in great detail, probably an hour's worth of interesting material, compelling material you may have never seen before. We'll give you great apologetic information that you can get tomorrow night here on Crossing Crown Radio on Facebook. But our main outreach is on YouTube. That's where we have our main audience. You can go there if you want and see Crossing Crown Radio and subscribe, and you can also donate there. But if you don't know Jesus, this is your opportunity. Right now, you've heard the gospel. You've heard the truth of Jesus. We've talked about Jesus all night. And understand this. The gospel is found in 1 Corinthians 15, the content therein. That Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins. He was buried and he rose again on the third day, according to the scriptures. That's found in 1 Corinthians 1 through 4. If God has put on your heart, if his grace is working on your heart, you've heard his word and spirit, and you're saying, I really believe in Jesus now. Doesn't matter what you've called yourself before, whether it's a Hindu, a Muslim, an atheist, forget all that for now. But between you and your Father, your Heavenly Father, if you want to know for sure you have a place in heaven, you call out to God and you say, I believe. I believe in Jesus. I believe, Father, that Jesus died on the cross for all my sins, that you raised him from the dead on the third day. This I believe. I give Jesus my whole heart and all my life, and I'm determined to follow him all the days of my life. If that's you, get involved in a church as soon as possible. Find a good church. It may not be the first church you go to, but find a good Bible-believing church. Read your Bible every day. Get a Bible app and get some apps sending you scriptures every day. And here at Cross and Crown Radio, send us a Facebook message, or if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a comment, or you can give us an email, and we will make sure that we give you free materials. In fact, those that get saved, we give them 2 free books just to start. If you get saved through this ministry or some other ministry, you just got saved, you want some material, we'll give you 2 books for free. Just write us and let us know. We'll send you those books for free. And so all you have to do is go to Cross and Crown Radio, leave a comment for that, or go on Facebook and message us, and we'll send you that material if you just got saved. And if you can't afford it, anybody out there, you let us know. We love to give books sent. We send dozens and dozens and dozens of books every year, free to people who are Christians, but they don't have enough financial resources to afford them. We'll pay the shipping also. So I appreciate all you joining us, and make sure you pray for those folks in Nigeria. Pray for all the persecution going on there, because you know what? As bad as some of our lives might be, some of the trials and tribulations, the suffering, you don't have to worry about somebody right now coming in the middle of the night and killing your children in their bed in the name of Islam. And so we want to see Muslims get saved. We want to see them understand and delight and rejoice, and then share the love that's found in Jesus. So this is Pastor Mike Robinson. Until tomorrow night, when we talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the whole show almost. Until next time, saying may God richly bless you.
Hey guys, please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us a lot. Additionally, don't forget to join our full access media experience. We want you to know that Cross and Crown Full Access is now available for just $7.99 a month. Full Access provides an enjoyable Christian media experience. Every day we produce biblical, entertaining, and Christ-centered programs for you on demand. Sign up for Cross and Crown Full Access and get every television show, the after show, a free book monthly, and all our academic work at your command. All just one click away at gospeltruthshow.podbean.com. Help us reach the world.